Another loiterer casing houses before he breaks into one.
Barbara Ellison's voice sliced across Magnolia Lane in broad daylight as Elias Grant stood in his own driveway, his mother's house key digging into his palm and a box of Ruth's photographs pressed against his chest. She had called the police herself, demanding they remove him from the property and arrest him before he hurt somebody. An officer moved between Elias and the front door, one hand hovering near his holster, while Barbara pointed from the sidewalk like she had caught a criminal in the act.
He was testing locks,
She declared, loud enough for every neighbor checking mail to stare. Elias looked toward the porch Ruth had fought to leave him.
"This is my home,"
He said. Barbara's smile sharpened, unaware that inside Elias Grant's jacket sat the one credential that could turn her accusation into the worst mistake of her life. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. Elias Grant set down the cardboard box on the brick steps of his mother's house, his house now, and stretched his back. The evening sky had turned a deep purple, with streaks of orange fading behind the tall oaks that lined Magnolia Lane. A cricket chirped somewhere in the freshly cut grass. He breathed in the scent of magnolia blossoms and remembered how his mother, Ruth, had loved this place. Even as her health failed, she'd talk about the porch swing she wanted to install, the Sunday dinners she'd planned to host, dreams that faded with her strength. Finally done, he muttered to himself, looking at the moving truck in the driveway. The house was a handsome brick colonial with white shutters and a covered porch. Nothing flashy, but solid and dignified, just like Ruth had been. The porch light wasn't working, and Elias made a mental note to fix it tomorrow. For now, the fading daylight was enough to see by. He pulled out his keys and checked the front door lock, jiggling it slightly. Old houses had temperamental locks, and this one was no exception. The brass knob felt cool under his fingers. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Across the street, a lace curtain dropped quickly back into place at the front window of a large white colonial. Elias paused. 25 years in the FBI had trained him to notice details others missed. Someone was watching him. He ignored it and turned his attention back to the porch light. Standing on tiptoe, he unscrewed the glass cover to check if the bulb needed replacing. The street was quiet except for the occasional car passing by, headlights sweeping across the houses. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing there?" The sharp voice cut through the evening calm. A woman stood at the edge of his driveway, arms crossed over her chest. She wore beige slacks and a blue cardigan, her gray-streaked blonde hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her posture was rigid, her chin lifted high. Elias recognized her immediately from his mother's descriptions. Barbara Ellison, HOA president, neighborhood watchdog, self-appointed guardian of Magnolia Lane's standards. "Good evening," Elias said calmly, stepping down from the porch. "Can I help you?" "You can tell me what you're doing at Ruth Grant's house," Barbara said, her voice carrying down the street. "This neighborhood has had break-ins recently." Elias noticed how she emphasized this neighborhood, as if it were somewhere he couldn't possibly belong. "I live here," he said simply. "Ruth Grant was my mother." Barbara's eyebrows shot up. Ruth never mentioned a son moving in. Her gaze traveled from his face to the moving truck, suspicion etched in every line of her face. "I inherited the house after she passed," Elias explained, keeping his voice level. "I'm moving in tonight." "Do you have identification? Proof of ownership?" Barbara demanded, pulling out her phone. "Anyone can claim anything." Elias felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the one that came whenever someone questioned his right to be somewhere. After 30 years of service to his country, it never got easier. "Ma'am, I don't need to show you identification to enter my own home," he said quietly. Barbara's lips thinned. "This is a safe, respectable community. We look out for each other. If you have nothing to hide—" "I have nothing to hide," Elias interrupted. "But I also don't answer to you." Barbara's face flushed. She held up her phone. "Then you won't mind waiting while I call the police. For everyone's safety." From the porch next door, Elias saw movement. An older black woman with silver-streaked hair stepped out, watching the scene unfold with a worried expression. She wore a floral housecoat and slippers. This must be Nadine Porter, his mother's friend. "Barbara Ellison, what are you doing?" Nadine called out. "That's Elias Grant, Ruth's son. You know full well Ruth left him that house." Barbara ignored her, speaking loudly into her phone. "Yes, officer. There's an unknown man trying to enter Ruth Grant's house on Magnolia Lane. Ruth passed away recently, and the property should be vacant." Elias noticed curtains twitching in several houses along the street. Faces appeared in windows, some curious, others concerned. He felt like an exhibit in a museum, the stranger who didn't belong. He took a deep breath, centering himself. This wasn't his first encounter with prejudice wrapped in the language of safety and concern. He would handle it the way he always did, with dignity and restraint. The low rumble of an engine broke the tension. A police cruiser turned onto Magnolia Lane, its blue and red lights cutting through the gathering darkness, reflecting against the brick facade of Elias's new home. The flashing lights painted everything in alternating shadows of blue and red, turning the peaceful street into something sinister. Officer Dale Rusk stepped out of his cruiser, adjusting his belt as he approached. The flashing lights behind him cast long shadows across the yard. He was stocky, early 40s, with close-cropped hair and a face set in permanent suspicion. "Evening," Officer Rusk said, his hand resting near his holster. "What's going on here?" Barbara hurried to position herself slightly behind the officer, her face transformed into a mask of fear. "That's him, officer," she said, pointing at Elias. "I saw him trying doors and looking through windows." Elias remained perfectly still, his hands visible at his sides. Years of experience had taught him exactly how to behave in situations like this. "Sir, can you explain what you're doing on this property?" Rusk asked, his tone sharp. "I'm moving into my home," Elias replied calmly. "This house belonged to my mother, Ruth Grant. She passed away last month, and I've inherited the property." Barbara stepped forward. "He just showed up with that truck. Ruth never mentioned a son moving in. I've lived across the street for 15 years, and I've barely seen him visit." The accusation stung, but Elias kept his face neutral. "Do you have any identification, sir?" Officer Rusk asked, taking a step closer. "Yes, I do," Elias said, slowly reaching toward his back pocket. "My wallet is here. I'm going to take it out now." Rusk nodded, watching every movement. Elias retrieved his license and handed it over. "I also have the deed paperwork and closing documents in that box by the steps." Rusk examined the license with exaggerated care, then looked back at Elias. "This address doesn't match this property." "That's correct," Elias explained. "I haven't updated my license yet. I've been living in Northern Virginia until now." "So you admit you don't actually live here?" Barbara interjected, her voice rising. "I saw him looking through the side windows, officer, testing the back door handle. I was checking that the house was secure," Elias said evenly. "I arrived about 20 minutes ago." Officer Rusk frowned. "Why is the house dark if you're moving in? Why are there boxes still in the driveway?" "I just got here," Elias repeated. "I haven't had time to turn on lights or unpack." Barbara scoffed. "We've had break-ins in this neighborhood before. We have to be careful." She raised her voice, clearly performing for the small crowd gathering on the sidewalk. "This neighborhood has standards." Rusk nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Sir, I'm going to need to see those property documents." Elias walked slowly to the box, feeling every eye on him. He retrieved a folder and handed it to the officer. "Here's the deed transfer, proof of ownership, and the mortgage paperwork. My mother left me the house, and I purchased her remaining mortgage balance." As Rusk flipped through the documents, Nadine Porter stepped off her porch and approached. "Officer, this is ridiculous. I've known Elias since he was a boy. Ruth was my best friend for 20 years. This is absolutely her son." Rusk barely glanced at her. "Ma'am, please step back. I'm conducting an investigation." Barbara smiled thinly. "We're just being safe, Nadine. You understand." The humiliation built with each passing second. Neighbors whispered to each other. Someone had their phone out, recording. Elias felt a familiar burn in his stomach, anger wrapped in tight control. Officer Rusk handed back the paperwork, but didn't step away. "Sir, I need to ask you one more question. Do you have any weapons on you or in your vehicle?" The question hung in the air. Elias looked directly at the officer. "Yes, I do," Barbara gasped dramatically. Several neighbors took a step back. Officer Rusk's hand moved closer to his weapon. "I am a federal agent," Elias stated calmly. "My service weapon is secured according to regulation." Then, with deliberate movements, he reached into his jacket and produced his credentials. The FBI shield caught the light from the police cruiser. "I'm Special Agent Elias Grant, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The change in Officer Rusk was immediate and complete. His hand dropped from his belt. His posture straightened. His face, which had been set in stern authority, suddenly looked uncertain. I apologize, sir," Rusk stammered. "We were just responding to a call about a suspicious person." "I understand," Elias replied. "You were doing your job. But as you can see, I'm simply moving into my home." The neighbors had gone silent. Barbara stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, her performance of fear forgotten. Her eyes darted around, noticing how everyone was watching her now, instead of Elias. "Well," she said with a nervous laugh, "how was I supposed to know? I was just being vigilant." Elias turned to face her directly. "You weren't supposed to know. You were supposed to mind your business." The words landed like stones in still water. Several neighbors exchanged glances. Someone coughed awkwardly. Officer Rusk backed away. "Everything appears to be in order, Agent Grant. Sorry for the inconvenience." "Thank you, officer," Elias replied. As Rusk returned to his cruiser, Barbara approached Elias with a brittle smile. "I feel just awful about this misunderstanding," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Welcome to the neighborhood." But as the crowd began to disperse and Rusk pulled away, she leaned close to Elias, her smile never reaching her eyes. "You may have a badge, Agent Grant," she whispered, "but I run this street." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked back toward her house, her posture perfect, her defeat temporary. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the old refrigerator. Elias stood in his mother's kitchen, still feeling the tension from the confrontation outside. He placed the box of Ruth's belongings on the oak table where she'd served Sunday dinners for decades. His hands weren't shaking, but something inside him was. 30 years in federal law enforcement had taught him to control his reactions, to breathe, to think, to plan. But this wasn't some case file or field operation. This was his mother's house, the home she'd saved for, the place she'd planned to spend her final years in peace. Elias ran his hand over the worn tablecloth. The kitchen still smelled faintly of lemon polish, and the lavender sachets Ruth kept in every drawer. He hadn't been here enough during her final months, always working, always promising to visit next weekend. "I'm here now, Mama," he whispered to the empty room. The soft scrape of paper against wood interrupted his thoughts. Elias turned toward the front of the house. Something had just slid under the door. He moved quietly through the living room, instinctively reaching for the weapon that wasn't there. Old habits. The porch light cast a shadow beneath the door. Someone had just been there. A white envelope lay on the hardwood floor. No name. No stamp, just the gold-embossed letters. Magnolia Lane Homeowners Association. Elias picked it up and tore it open. Inside was an official notice, printed on heavy letterhead. Violation notice. Property at 1426 Magnolia Lane. The letter listed multiple violations. Overgrown vegetation, front shrubs exceed height restrictions, exterior trim in disrepair, porch and window frames, unauthorized vehicle in driveway, non-compliant exterior lighting fixtures. At the bottom was a total, $750 in fines. The inspection date was listed as 3 weeks ago. The payment was already past due. 3 weeks ago? Elias muttered. He hadn't even completed the purchase then. He flipped to the second page. The letter was signed by Barbara Ellison, HOA president, and dated last Monday, days before tonight's confrontation. The realization hit him. Barbara had prepared this before she ever called the police. She'd been planning to come after him before he'd even moved in. Elias folded the letter carefully. He needed to organize all this, keep records, document everything. Ruth had always kept important papers in the kitchen drawer beside the sink. He went to look for a folder. When he pulled open the drawer, he found it neatly organized with labeled dividers. Electric bills, insurance, medical, and at the back, a thick manila folder labeled in Ruth's careful handwriting, House Trouble. Elias felt a chill. He pulled out the folder and returned to the table. Inside were dozens of letters, all from the Magnolia Lane HOA, all signed by Barbara Ellison. The violations were identical to his: overgrown shrubs, peeling paint, improper lighting. The dates stretched back 18 months. The fines totaled thousands of dollars. Ruth had paper-clipped receipts to many of the notices, proof she'd fixed the problems, photographs of newly trimmed hedges, a handyman's bill for fresh paint. But the violations kept coming. In the margins of the letters, Ruth had made notes in her shaky handwriting. Called Barbara today. She said it's still not right. Third notice about the same rosebush. They came again while I was at chemo. Barbara said I should sell if I can't maintain. They don't want me here anymore. The last note, dated 2 months before Ruth passed, simply read, I don't feel welcome in my own home. Elias spread the papers across the table. His mother, a proud woman who'd worked as a school librarian for 40 years, who'd saved every penny to buy this house, had been bullied in her final months. While battling cancer, while he was away, the grief he'd been carrying since Ruth's funeral transformed into something harder, something with edges. His mind, trained by decades of investigation, began fitting pieces together. This wasn't random. This wasn't one uncomfortable encounter with a nosy neighbor. Barbara Ellison had been targeting his mother, and now she was targeting him. Elias sat motionless at the kitchen table, surrounded by Ruth's careful documentation of her suffering. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the old wall clock that had hung there since he was a child. I'm sorry, Mama, he whispered, placing his hand on the stack of violation notices. I should have been here. He looked around at the home Ruth had fought to keep, the home where she'd planned to host family gatherings, tend her garden, and rock on the porch swing she never got to install. His mother had been harassed in her final days, and he'd just met the woman responsible. The next morning, Elias was sorting through more of his mother's papers when a gentle knock came at the back door. He looked up, instantly alert. It wasn't the front door where visitors normally came. This was the kitchen entrance that faced the small backyard. Through the window, he saw Nadine Porter standing on the back step. She balanced a covered casserole dish in one hand and carried 2 coffee cups in the other. Elias opened the door. "Morning, Miss Porter. It's Nadine, please." She smiled warmly. "I thought you might need breakfast and decent coffee. Moving is hungry work." The aroma of cinnamon and coffee filled the kitchen as Nadine set everything down on the counter. Her movements were comfortable, familiar with the space. Elias realized she must have visited his mother often. "Thank you," Elias said, taking the coffee she offered. "I saw what happened yesterday." Nadine's voice dropped lower. "With Barbara and that officer." Elias nodded. "Not exactly the welcome wagon." "That's not who we are." Nadine's eyes were serious. "At least, not all of us." She glanced at the papers spread across Ruth's kitchen table. "What's all this?" Elias hesitated, then decided to trust her. "HOA violation notices. My mother kept them all." He pushed the folder toward her. "Barbara's been after this house for a while, it seems." Nadine didn't look surprised. She set down her coffee and began looking through the notices. Her face hardened as she read Ruth's notes in the margins. "Your mother wasn't the only one," she said finally. "What do you mean?" Nadine sighed heavily. "Barbara's been doing this for years, targeting certain people. Widows living alone, Black and Latino homeowners, elderly folks who can't fight back." She tapped the violation notices. First come the fines, then the complaints to the county, then the threats about property values and community standards. "But why?" Elias asked, though he was beginning to see the pattern. "Money, control. Pick one." Nadine's voice was bitter. "People get scared, especially when the fines pile up. They can't afford to fight. So they sell, usually below market value." "To whom?" Elias asked, though he suspected the answer. "To Graham Ellison's development company." Nadine looked him straight in the eye. "Barbara's brother-in-law." The pieces clicked into place. "It's a racket. A very profitable one." Nadine nodded. "They've flipped at least 6 houses on this street in the last 3 years. Buy low from frightened owners. Renovate. Sell high to the right kind of buyer." Elias felt the anger building in his chest. "Was my mother pressured to sell?" Nadine looked down at her coffee. "Yes," she said quietly. "Ruth was so strong at first. She fought back, kept records, called the county. But then she got sick, and Barbara just intensified everything." "What do you mean?" "Daily drive-bys, notes on the door, late-night calls about violations that needed immediate attention." Nadine's voice cracked. "The last few months, Ruth kept her curtains closed. She was afraid to be seen in her own window." The image hit Elias hard. His mother, proud, dignified Ruth Grant, hiding in her own home. While he was away working cases, building his career, Ruth had faced this battle alone. "I should have been here," he said, his voice raw. Nadine reached across the table and touched his hand. "She was proud of you, Elias. So proud. She told everyone her son was out protecting people. She wouldn't have wanted you to give that up. But she needed protection, too." The guilt felt like a stone in his chest. She kept fighting in her own way. Nadine gestured to the organized files. "Your mother documented everything. She knew someday it would matter." Elias stared at the papers. "And now it does." "What will you do?" Nadine asked. "What I've been trained to do. Follow the evidence. Find the pattern. Build a case." Nadine nodded slowly, but concern shadowed her face. "You need to know something about Barbara. She doesn't back down when challenged." She paused. "She escalates." "So do I," Elias said quietly. "Barbara has connections. Her husband was a judge. The police chief plays golf with her brother. Half the county council comes to her Christmas party. I have connections too." Nadine's eyes were worried. "This isn't just about yesterday or these violation notices, Elias. Barbara won't stop. When people stand up to her, things get worse. much worse. I'm not afraid of Barbara Ellison. Maybe you should be, Nadine said. Not for yourself, but for what she might do to others to get to you. She gestured around the kitchen. Ruth wanted this house to be a place of peace for you. Barbara will make sure it's anything but. That same afternoon, a weathered blue pickup truck pulled into Elias's driveway. The door swung open, and a broad-shouldered black man stepped out, work boots crunching on the gravel. He looked up at Ruth's house, then spotted Elias standing on the cracked front steps. "Mr. Grant?" he called, extending a calloused hand. "Andre Bell. I'm here about the porch." Elias shook his hand firmly. "Thanks for coming on short notice." Andre nodded, his eyes already assessing the damaged wood. "Your mother kept this place nice. Shame about these steps, though. Been meaning to fix them for her." "You knew my mother?" Elias asked. "Yes, sir. Did some work for her last year. Bathroom sink, kitchen faucet." Andre's face softened. Miss Ruth was good people. Always had sweet tea waiting, even when she wasn't feeling her best. Elias felt a pang of gratitude. "That sounds like her." Andre set down his toolbox and knelt to examine the rotting porch boards. "This won't take much. Replace these 4 boards. Reinforce the railing." His fingers probed the wood expertly. "Could start tomorrow morning if that works." "That would be perfect," Elias said. Andre hesitated, his expression turning serious. "Just so you know, I'm not usually the one who makes these house calls anymore. I own the company, got 5 guys working for me. But when Nadine said it was Ruth Grant's son," he straightened up. "Thought I should come myself." Before Elias could respond, the clip-clop of hard shoes on pavement caught their attention. Barbara Ellison was marching across the street, her silk blouse gleaming in the afternoon sun. 2 men in polo shirts trailed behind her like deputies. "Trouble," Andre muttered, his shoulders tensing. Barbara stopped at the edge of the property, arms folded across her chest. "Excuse me," she called, her voice carrying across the yard. "What exactly is going on here?" Elias stepped forward. "Home repairs, Mrs. Ellison." Barbara's eyes narrowed on Andre's truck. "That vehicle is not on the approved contractor list, and I don't see any permit displayed for structural modifications." Andre stood slowly, brushing dust from his knees. "Ma'am, we're just inspecting today. No work has started." "We?" Barbara's voice dripped with skepticism. "And you are?" "Andre Bell. Bell Home Repair and Construction." Something flashed in Barbara's eyes. Recognition, then malice. Bell. "Yes, I remember that name." Andre's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Is there a problem?" Elias asked. Barbara gestured to the 2 men behind her. "These are Jim Taylor and Frank Moss from the HOA board. We're concerned about unauthorized construction." She pointed at the porch. "Any modifications to street-facing structures require prior written approval." "The porch is unsafe," Elias said firmly. "The boards are rotting." "Then you should have filed the proper paperwork," Barbara replied. "There are channels, Mr. Grant, rules that everyone follows, or should." She looked pointedly at Andre. "Some contractors have reputations in this neighborhood." Andre's hands clenched at his sides. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Barbara said, her voice falsely sweet, "that 2 years ago there was an unfortunate incident involving missing items and workers from your company." "Nothing was ever proven," Andre said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "No charges filed." "Because the homeowner was merciful," Barbara smiled. "But memories are long here." Elias watched Andre's face. The man was struggling to maintain his composure, pride wrestling with practicality. "You should pack up and leave," Barbara continued, "before trouble follows you again. I'm sure Mr. Grant can find an approved contractor." Andre took a half-step forward. "Listen, I've worked hard to build my business, and I don't appreciate—" Elias placed a steady hand on Andre's shoulder. "Mr. Bell is here at my request," he said calmly. "The repairs are necessary for safety, and they're well within county code. HOA rules supersede county code when it comes to aesthetics," Jim Taylor piped up, looking pleased with himself. By now, several neighbors had drifted onto their lawns, pretending to check mail or water plants while watching the confrontation. Across the street, Nadine emerged onto her porch, arms crossed, her presence a silent statement of support. "The work will proceed," Elias said. "If fines follow, I'll address them appropriately." Barbara's carefully arranged smile faltered for just a moment. Then she recovered, smoothing her expression into one of regretful authority. "Well, this will have to be discussed at tomorrow night's emergency HOA meeting. 7 o'clock, the community center." She raised her voice slightly, ensuring the watching neighbors could hear. "I encourage everyone to attend. We'll be addressing several concerning developments in our community." With a final pointed look at Andre's truck, Barbara turned to leave, her board members following like trained dogs. "Mrs. Ellison," Elias called after her. She paused, turning back with eyebrows raised. "My mother's records show quite a pattern of these emergency meetings whenever she questioned HOA decisions." Something cold flickered in Barbara's eyes. "Your mother misunderstood many things toward the end, Mr. Grant. Confusion is common at that age." The casual cruelty of the remark hung in the air. Elias watched Barbara walk away, her heels striking the pavement with measured confidence. The watching neighbors slowly dispersed, whispering among themselves. Andre exhaled slowly. "I should go." "No," Elias said. "I want you to do the work. Tomorrow morning." Andre studied him carefully. "You know she'll make things hard for you." "She already has," Elias replied. "She just doesn't know what kind of fight she started." The neighborhood clubhouse buzzed with tense energy as Elias stepped through the double doors. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows faced a long table at the front of the room. Barbara Ellison sat center stage, perfectly positioned beneath the wall-mounted HOA crest, a clipboard and gavel before her. 2 board members flanked her like sentries. The scene reminded Elias of countless interrogation setups he'd witnessed throughout his FBI career, designed to intimidate, to establish authority. Familiar faces filled the room. Nadine offered a slight nod from the 3rd row. Andre Bell stood against the back wall, arms crossed. And there, near the window, Officer Dale Rusk lounged in his civilian clothes, making a point of checking his watch as Elias entered. Barbara tapped her gavel once. "Let's begin, shall we?" Elias took a seat in the 2nd row, directly in Barbara's line of sight. He placed his leather portfolio on his lap, unruffled. Barbara cleared her throat dramatically. "I've called this emergency meeting to address several concerning developments in our community." Her eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Elias before continuing. "As many of you know, we've had some disruptions lately that threaten the peace and stability of Magnolia Lane." She shuffled papers with practiced efficiency. "Last week, police were called regarding a suspicious person. Unfortunately, this individual turned out to be Mr. Grant, who has recently acquired his mother's property." Her tone suggested this was an unfortunate misunderstanding rather than her deliberate action. "While we welcome new residents, we expect everyone to respect our established standards," Barbara continued. "Mr. Grant has already demonstrated resistance to these standards by hiring an unauthorized contractor and questioning legitimate HOA violations." Officer Rusk nodded sagely from his corner, adding wordless authority to Barbara's claims. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Mrs. Ellison," Elias said evenly, "may I address these accusations?" Barbara's smile tightened. "We typically follow a speaker's list, Mr. Grant, but since you're new—" "I'm familiar with procedural rules," Elias said, standing. He opened his portfolio and extracted several documents. I have my deed, proof of paid dues, and my HOA registration submitted last month. He placed them on the table, then added another stack. I also have copies of violations issued to my mother, Ruth Grant, over the past year. Barbara's eyes narrowed slightly. Those aren't relevant to tonight's. They establish a pattern, Elias continued calmly. For example, this notice cites dead shrubs on March 12th, but the attached photo shows fall leaves. The inspection date is March 14th, 2 days after the fine was issued. A murmur rippled through the audience. Administrative errors happen, Jim Taylor interjected. That's hardly proof of anything. Then perhaps someone can explain why my mother was fined for an unmowed lawn during the week she was hospitalized. Elias held up another notice. Or why the violation photos for 3 different homes appear to show the same broken fence post. Barbara's knuckles whitened around her gavel. Mr. Grant, you're new here. You don't understand how community standards work. Your mother struggled to maintain her property. My mother maintained her property beautifully for 20 years, Elias said, his voice level but firm. Until suddenly, 2 years ago, she began receiving these notices. He turned slightly, facing both Barbara and the audience. I have a question about process. When homeowners can't pay accumulating fines, what happens next? The HOA can place a lien, Jim began. And how many properties with liens have been purchased by Graham Ellison's development company in the past 3 years? Elias asked. The room went absolutely still. Barbara's face flushed. Mr. Ellison's business activities aren't HOA concerns, aren't they? Elias raised an eyebrow. When the HOA president's brother-in-law profits from distressed sales created by questionable violations? From the corner of his eye, Elias noticed an elderly white woman at the edge of the room. She wore a neat cardigan despite the warm evening, her thin shoulders hunched forward. When Graham Ellison's name was mentioned, she stared fixedly at the floor, her hands clutching her purse with white-knuckle intensity. Barbara slammed her gavel down. That's enough! You're making baseless accusations. I'm asking questions, Elias replied. Questions my mother wrote in her notes, but was too intimidated to ask publicly. This meeting was called to address your violations, not to indulge conspiracy theories, Barbara snapped. She turned to the room with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. I think we've all heard enough disruption for one evening. Meeting adjourned. The board will discuss appropriate actions regarding Mr. Grant's violations privately. People began to rise, some lingering to whisper, others hurrying toward the exit. Officer Rusk made a point of clapping Barbara's husband on the shoulder, a visual reminder of his allegiance. As the room cleared, Elias noticed the elderly woman still seated, trembling visibly. She clutched her purse against her chest like armor. When she finally stood to leave, her movements were stiff with tension. She avoided looking in Barbara's direction entirely. Elias watched her shuffle toward the exit, her eyes fixed on the floor as though afraid to meet anyone's gaze. The clubhouse doors banged shut as homeowners dispersed into the warm evening air. Streetlights cast long shadows across the parking lot, and cicadas hummed in the trees lining the path. Elias and Nadine walked out together, both quiet with contained anger. That woman has no shame, Nadine finally said, shaking her head. Using a badge and a gavel like weapons. Elias was about to respond when he noticed a small figure sitting alone on a bench at the edge of the property. Under the weak glow of a security light sat Lillian Price, still clutching her purse, shoulders curved inward, as if trying to disappear. That's Lillian, Nadine whispered. Lives 3 doors down from your mother's place. Husband died about 5 years back. Elias nodded, and they approached slowly. Lillian flinched when their shadows fell across her. Mrs. Price? Elias kept his voice gentle. I'm Elias Grant, Ruth's son. Recognition flickered in Lillian's tired eyes. Ruth was a good neighbor, always had a kind word. Her voice was barely audible, like someone accustomed to not being heard. "Mind if we sit with you?" Nadine asked. Lillian scooted over, making room. Her hands never stopped fidgeting with the clasp of her worn purse. "I noticed your reaction when I mentioned Graham Ellison," Elias said carefully. Lillian's breathing quickened. She glanced around nervously, as though Barbara might appear from the shadows. "You can talk to us," Nadine assured her, patting Lillian's thin hand. "We're not them." Tears welled in Lillian's faded blue eyes. "It started after Frank passed. Little things at first. My mailbox was too rusty. My curtains were non-conforming pattern. My front step needed immediate repainting." She pulled a crumpled tissue from her pocket. "I fixed everything they asked. But there was always something new." "How much have they fined you?" Elias asked. "Over $6,000 in 3 years." Lillian's voice broke. "My fixed income barely covers medication and groceries. I had to use Frank's life insurance, which was supposed to last me." "That's criminal," Nadine said, squeezing Lillian's hand. Lillian dabbed at her eyes. "Last month, Barbara brought Graham to my door. Said the HOA was reluctantly moving toward placing a lien, but Graham had a solution. He'd buy my house for cash, let me stay as a renter for 6 months while I found somewhere else." "At what price?" Elias asked, already knowing the answer. "Barely half what Frank and I paid 15 years ago," Lillian whispered. "Nowhere near what other homes sell for." "But Barbara said with the violations, it was generous. Why didn't you fight this?" Elias leaned forward. "These fines sound fraudulent." Lillian gave a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. "Fight who? Barbara's husband was a county judge for 30 years. Everyone important in town owes him favors. And who believes old women on fixed incomes? We're just confused or difficult." She looked up at Elias with sudden intensity. "Barbara told me straight out, complain to authorities and things would get worse before they got better." "I believe you," Elias said firmly. "And I can help. Do you keep copies of these notices?" "Everyone," Lillian nodded. "Frank always said to keep paperwork. They're in my filing cabinet." "Would you be willing to let me see them?" Elias asked. Fear crossed Lillian's face. "If Barbara finds out I'm talking to you—" "We'll be careful," Nadine promised. "Nobody will know," Elias added. "I have experience protecting witnesses." Lillian seemed to consider this, then gave a small nod. "I just want to stay in my home. Frank built that back porch himself. His rose bushes still bloom every summer." "Let's get you home," Nadine said, helping Lillian stand. The three walked slowly along the tree-lined street. Elias noticed how Lillian glanced nervously at each passing car, the way she lowered her head when they passed certain houses, the physical manifestation of years of intimidation. As they approached Lillian's neat single-story home, a black SUV idled near the curb about 50 yards away, headlights off. When Elias turned to look directly at it, the engine started and the vehicle pulled away smoothly. "Graham," Nadine said flatly. "That's his Escalade, custom license plate." Lillian's hand trembled on her house key. "They're watching me. They know I talk to you." "Let them watch," Elias said, his voice hardening. "I spent 20 years investigating people a lot more dangerous than Barbara and Graham Ellison." Under the porch light, Lillian looked suddenly frail, a woman worn down by fear and isolation. She turned to Elias, her voice barely above a whisper. "They'll take my house. They've taken 3 others on this street already." Elias looked directly into her eyes. "Mrs. Price, I promise you, they will not take your house. Not yours, not anyone else's, not while I'm here." Later that night, Elias sat on the edge of Ruth's bed, the lamp casting soft shadows across the floral wallpaper she had chosen years ago. The day's confrontations had left him drained, but determined. He opened the closet door and inhaled. Her scent still lingered faintly on her clothes, a mix of lavender and the lemon polish she used on the furniture. Elias reached for a wicker basket on the top shelf. Ruth's sewing basket. The familiar container held more than needles and thread. It was where she kept small treasures and mementos that mattered to her. "Let's see what you were hiding, Mama," he murmured, setting the basket on the bed. He lifted the hinged lid and began sorting through the contents. Thimbles, spools of thread, buttons saved from old coats. Beneath a layer of fabric scraps, he found a worn photo album with yellowed pictures of his father. A bundle of birthday cards Elias had sent over the years, tied with a faded ribbon. Something hard pressed against his fingers as he shifted a stack of folded silk scarves. Elias pulled out a small silver digital recorder. He turned it over in his hand, remembering how Ruth had started using it after her memory began slipping. She would record grocery lists, Bible verses, and reminders to herself. Elias pressed the power button, and the small screen illuminated. Several files appeared, labeled by date. Most were short voice memos about appointments or church choir songs, but one file caught his attention, dated exactly 3 weeks before Ruth's final hospitalization. His thumb hovered over the play button. Something made him hesitate, as if he already knew what he might hear. Taking a deep breath, Elias pressed play. The first sound was a gentle knock, followed by Ruth's voice, thin but clear. "Come in. It's open." A moment of silence, then another voice, polished, controlled, immediately recognizable. "Barbara Ellison." "Ruth, I brought you some of that tea you mentioned at the garden club meeting. How are you feeling today?" His mother's response was guarded. "Better, thank you. That's thoughtful of you. I wanted to check in about the house situation." Barbara's voice turned businesslike. "Have you given any more thought to our conversation?" A silence hung in the recording. Elias could almost see his mother's face. "I'm not selling, Barbara." Barbara sighed theatrically. "Ruth, we've been over this. At your age, with your health concerns, managing a property this size isn't practical. Graham's offer is more than fair." "It's less than half what the Miller's house sold for last year," Ruth replied, her voice stronger than Elias expected. "Their house didn't have structural issues or code violations?" Barbara's tone hardened. "The HOA has been lenient with you, Ruth, but that can't continue indefinitely. There are no violations. I've fixed everything you people complained about. The board sees things differently." Paper rustled in the background. "And frankly, Ruth, we need to discuss what happens if you leave this house to your son." Elias's heart tightened. He gripped the recorder more firmly. "My son has nothing to do with this," Ruth said firmly. "But he does." Barbara's voice dropped, becoming almost confidential. "Let's be honest. People connected to your son. They wouldn't fit comfortably on Magnolia Lane. The neighbors have certain expectations, standards." The naked prejudice in Barbara's words made Elias's jaw clench. "This neighborhood functions because of shared values," Barbara continued. "If your son inherits, things will become unpleasant. The HOA can make life very expensive for homeowners who don't blend in." "You're threatening me." Ruth's voice trembled slightly. "I'm being practical. Selling now would be the dignified choice. Spare everyone the awkwardness. Get out of my house." Ruth's voice was quiet but firm. "Think of the fines, the liens, the public embarrassment. Is that really what you want to leave your son? A neighborhood where he's not welcome?" There was a rustle of movement. Then Ruth's voice came through clearer, as if she'd picked up the recorder. "My son earned every room he ever walked into. This house will be his, because I worked for it, and he deserves it. Now leave." The recording continued for a few seconds, footsteps, a door closing, then ended. Elias sat motionless on the bed, tears streaming down his face. His shoulders shook with silent sobs as the full weight of what he'd heard settled over him. His mother, weak and ill, standing up to Barbara's cruelty and prejudice, defending him when he wasn't there to defend himself. "Oh, Mama," he whispered, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I should have been here." The recording was undeniable proof. Barbara's harassment of Ruth hadn't been about property values or neighborhood standards. It had been deliberate, calculated cruelty aimed at preventing a black man from inheriting a home on Magnolia Lane. Elias replayed the file, listening more carefully the second time. Barbara's voice was clear, her threats explicit. This wasn't just an HOA dispute. It was targeted discrimination with financial gain as the motive. With careful movements, Elias connected the recorder to his laptop and created multiple digital copies of the file. He stored versions in his email, cloud storage, and a separate USB drive. Evidence had to be preserved meticulously. When he was finished, Elias placed Ruth's recorder gently beside the growing HOA file on the nightstand. Two small objects that now represented his mother's quiet courage and his own mounting case against Barbara Ellison. The next morning, Elias stepped onto his front porch and found 3 fresh HOA violation notices taped to his door. One claimed his mailbox didn't match approved designs. Another cited improper lawn edging. The third complained about unauthorized construction materials visible from the street. Elias peeled them off one by one, noting they were already stamped urgent and dated with yesterday's date, though no inspection had occurred. A truck door slammed in the driveway. "You've got to be kidding me," Andre Bell growled, yanking a yellow card from his windshield. His broad shoulders were tight with tension as he marched toward Elias. "What's that?" Elias asked. "County inspection notice. Claims we're working without proper permits." Andre thrust the paper toward Elias. "This is exactly how she ruined me last time. Makes an anonymous complaint, then spreads word that I cut corners." Elias examined the notice. "But we filed everything correctly. Doesn't matter. Work stops until they clear it." Andre punched the porch railing, then immediately steadied himself. "Sorry, it's just, I've got a daughter to feed. I can't afford another hit to my reputation." Elias placed a steady hand on Andre's shoulder. "Let's call the county office right now." In the kitchen, Elias put his phone on speaker while Andre paced. "Building department," a bored voice answered. "This is Elias Grant at 1426 Magnolia Lane. We received a stop work notice, but our permits are in order." The clerk tapped on a keyboard. "Yes, we received a citizen complaint yesterday evening. The complainant reported unauthorized structural modifications potentially compromising neighborhood safety standards." Andre and Elias exchanged looks. The phrasing was identical to Barbara's HOA letters. "The complaint was anonymous?" Elias asked. "Yes, sir. Until inspection, all work must cease." After hanging up, Andre sank into a chair. 2 weeks minimum before they inspect. That's 2 weeks I can't work this job or schedule others. "I'll make sure you're paid for the downtime," Elias said. Andre shook his head. "It's not about money. It's about reputation. Last time, she spread rumors to half my client list." "We'll fix this," Elias promised. "She's leaving a trail." Sunday morning found the neighborhood at First Baptist Church. Elias sat beside Nadine in a back pew, noting the careful distance people kept from them. After the service, congregants gathered in the parking lot, shaking hands and chatting. Lillian stood with Nadine near her car, her thin fingers clutching her purse. Barbara appeared in a tailored blue dress and pearls, flanked by 2 HOA board members. She approached Lillian and Nadine with a concerned smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Lillian, dear," she said loudly enough for nearby church members to hear. "I've been worried about you. Are you feeling well lately? You seem confused about some neighborhood matters. Lillian flinched, her shoulders hunching. Barbara turned to Nadine. And Nadine, I know Ruth's passing was difficult for you, but encouraging others to rehash old grievances isn't healing. Nadine's expression remained composed. What grievances are you referring to, Barbara? Oh, you know. Barbara lowered her voice slightly, though still audible to those nearby, filling Elias's head with stories, making him think his mother was somehow targeted. Barbara placed her hand on Lillian's arm. And dragging dear Lillian into it, when we all know she gets facts mixed up these days. Church members shifted uncomfortably, watching. I'm not confused, Lillian said quietly. Of course you're not, Barbara patted her hand condescendingly. But Elias Grant is using both of you. He's stirring up trouble where there was peace. Nadine straightened her spine, looking Barbara directly in the eyes. Truth doesn't become trouble just because you fear it, Barbara. The parking lot went silent. Barbara's smile froze. I'm only concerned for the community. No, Nadine said calmly. You're concerned for yourself. Several church members nodded slightly. A woman stepped closer to Lillian, offering quiet support. Barbara's polished mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of naked fury before she recovered. Well, she said tightly, I'll pray for all of you. She turned and walked to her car, heels clicking sharply against the asphalt. That evening, Elias carefully mounted a small security camera above his front porch. The device would record a clear view of his yard, driveway, and the street beyond. She'll make a move tonight, Andre predicted, holding the ladder steady. You embarrassed her at church. Elias tightened the final screw. I'm counting on it. You know this won't stop her, Andre said quietly. No, Elias agreed, climbing down. But it'll document her. And people like Barbara hate nothing more than being seen for what they really are. Before dawn, Elias woke to the soft chime of his phone. The security app had detected movement on his porch overnight. He sat up in bed, the darkness still thick around him, and reached for his phone. The footage showed a shadowy figure moving across his front yard at 2:17 a.m. The person wore dark clothing and kept their face turned away from the camera. They approached Ruth's prized rose bushes that lined the walkway, the ones she had tended for years with arthritic hands, and deliberately, methodically, tore them from the ground. Stems snapped, thorns scattered, and decades of Ruth's loving care destroyed in minutes. The person then returned to a vehicle parked just at the edge of the camera's view. The license plate was covered with what looked like tape or cloth. Elias rewound the footage and played it again, his jaw tight. The destruction wasn't random. The person had targeted only Ruth's roses, leaving everything else untouched. When the first gray light of morning appeared, Elias stood in his yard surveying the damage. Broken stems and petals littered the walkway. The soil had been kicked across the grass. Nadine stepped out onto her porch, saw the destruction, and crossed the lawn to stand beside him. This is Barbara's work, she said quietly. Elias nodded. Not by her hand, but her order. What will you do? Exactly what she doesn't expect, Elias said. I'll follow the law. Later that morning, Elias drove to the county attorney's office with a thick folder of evidence. He brought Ruth's recording, all the HOA violation notices with their mismatched dates, Lillian's stack of questionable fines, and a written account of Andre's history with Barbara and the false theft accusations. He added his own police encounter and the security footage of the destroyed roses. He submitted everything formally, requesting an official investigation into the HOA's practices. I'm not using my badge, he told the assistant county attorney, a young woman with serious eyes. I'm filing this as a private citizen who believes laws are being broken. Within days, the county attorney's office announced a preliminary review of Magnolia Lane's Homeowners Association. The HOA board, under growing scrutiny, temporarily froze all new fines and enforcement actions. Andre's permit issue was suddenly cleared without explanation. Lillian received a letter stating her payment schedule would be reassessed. For the first time since arriving, Elias felt a flicker of hope. Neighbors began nodding to him again. Andre's crew returned to work on the porch. Lillian ventured outside to sit in her garden. "We're making progress," Nadine said one evening as they replanted Ruth's rose bushes together. "It's not over," Elias warned. He was right. The next day, Barbara unleashed her most devastating counterattack. She filed a formal complaint with the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility, alleging that Elias had used his position to threaten civilians, interfere in local governance, and intimidate an HOA president after what she called a lawful safety concern. Officer Rusk signed a supporting statement claiming Elias had been aggressive and had unnecessarily revealed his weapon during their encounter. The local news picked up the story immediately. FBI agent accused of intimidating neighborhood leader during HOA dispute. Barbara appeared on camera, looking wounded and composed in a soft pink sweater. "No one should feel afraid in their own neighborhood," she said, her eyes moist with practiced concern. Elias's phone rang that evening. His supervisor informed him that he was being placed on administrative leave while the complaint was reviewed. He would need to surrender his badge and weapon temporarily. "It's procedure," his supervisor said uncomfortably, "given the public nature of the complaint." After hanging up, Elias stood at his window, watching darkness fall over Magnolia Lane. A car pulled up across the street, and Barbara stepped out, wearing the same pink sweater from the news interview. She crossed the street and stopped at the edge of his property. Streetlights caught the satisfaction in her smile. "Mr. Grant," she called, loud enough for any listening neighbors to hear. "I wanted to express my regret about this unfortunate situation." Elias stepped onto his porch. "Did you? The Bureau called me today," she continued. "They were very concerned about your behavior. I'm sure they contacted you as part of their standard review," Elias replied evenly. Barbara's smile widened. "Without that badge, Mr. Grant, you're just another angry man with accusations." She glanced at the replanted rose bushes. "And those won't last long either." That same evening, Elias sat in Ruth's dark kitchen after surrendering his credentials temporarily, listening again to her recording. His mother's voice, fragile but determined, filled the quiet room. "My son earned every room he ever walked into." Ruth's voice trembled through the small speaker. Elias pressed his palms against the wooden table where Ruth had sat for decades, planning church events, paying bills, and later, fighting against Barbara's intimidation. His badge and service weapon were locked in a bureau safe. His career hung in the balance. Years of investigating corruption had taught him how systems protected themselves, but he'd never expected to be on this side of the equation. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He didn't bother turning on the light as he opened the door. Nadine Porter stood on the porch, holding a covered dish. "I figured you might not feel like cooking tonight," she said quietly. "Thank you, but I'm not hungry," Elias replied. "Well, I'm coming in anyway," Nadine said, stepping past him into the darkened house. She found the kitchen light switch and flipped it on. Sitting in the dark won't solve anything. Before Elias could respond, headlights swept across the front window. Andre Bell's truck pulled into the driveway, followed by a small blue sedan Elias didn't recognize. Andre stepped out first, then helped a younger woman from the passenger side of the car. "This is Marcia Price," Andre explained, when Elias opened the door again. "Lillian's daughter." Marcia was a serious-looking woman in her late 40s, with her mother's sharp eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "My mother couldn't sleep," she said. "She told me everything that's been happening." Elias gestured them inside. "I appreciate you all coming, but there's not much I can do right now. The Bureau has my badge while they investigate Barbara's complaint. We're not here for your badge, Nadine said, uncovering a dish of macaroni and cheese on the kitchen counter. We're here because we're finally done being scared alone. Andre nodded. Barbara's smart. She keeps everyone thinking they're the only one with problems. No one compares notes. Until now, Marcia added, placing her purse on the table. Mom called me crying about the news story. She said you were the only person who ever believed her. Elias sank into a chair. I can't use Bureau resources. I can't investigate officially. You don't need to, Nadine said firmly. You still have everything you need, as a homeowner and as Ruth's son. Andre leaned forward. After what happened today, I remembered something. When Barbara's friend accused my crew of stealing her jewelry 2 years ago, my truck had a dash cam running. I never even looked at the footage because I was so angry and ashamed after losing the job. You still have it? Elias asked, suddenly alert. Hard drives are cheap. I keep everything, Andre shrugged. It might show something useful. Marcia opened her purse and pulled out a folder. Mom kept this hidden under her mattress for months. Barbara gave it to her by mistake last fall during an HOA inspection. Mom was too scared to mention it, but she couldn't make herself throw it away either. Elias took the folder. Inside were draft purchase offers from Graham Ellison's development company for several homes on Magnolia Lane, including Lillian's and Ruth's. The offers were dated before any of the major HOA violations had been issued. They planned which houses to target, Elias said softly, before they ever sent a single fine notice. Barbara's hosting a public HOA hearing next week, Nadine explained, to approve Lillian's lien and permanently restrict your renovation rights. She's invited local news again. She thinks you're finished, Andre said. Elias looked around the kitchen at the three faces watching him. Barbara believed taking his badge had weakened him, but she'd made a critical mistake. By attacking him publicly, she had forced isolated victims to finally come together. Barbara keeps talking about property values and neighborhood standards, Elias said slowly. But this was never about protecting the community. It was about picking which neighbors to push out. So what do we do now? Marcia asked. Elias turned on the kitchen light and laid out a blank notepad across Ruth's table. We gather everything. Every letter. Every photo. Every recording. Every false fine. Every bank notice. He wrote each item carefully in a list. Barbara thinks she's won because she took my badge, but she forgot something important. What's that? Andre asked. People who get cornered eventually learn the shape of the cage, Elias said, remembering Ruth's quiet dignity on the recording. And once they learn it, they learn how to break it. The next morning, Elias drove his sedan down a narrow gravel lane, following Andre's pickup truck. Nadine sat beside him, while Marcia followed in her own car. They pulled up to a weathered workshop with peeling blue paint and a hand-carved wooden sign, Bell Contracting and Restoration. This is it, Elias said. Andre's place. The workshop smelled of sawdust and varnish. Tools hung in neat rows along the walls, and half-finished cabinets waited on workbenches. Andre led them through to a tiny back office barely big enough for a desk and filing cabinet. Sorry it's tight in here, Andre said, pulling out a chair for Nadine. Business hasn't been the same since, well, you know. Marcia stood in the doorway while Elias leaned against the wall. Andre opened a desk drawer and removed a black external hard drive. I save everything digital, Andre explained, connecting it to his computer. You never know when you might need proof of something. His thick fingers moved across the keyboard, searching through dated folders. Here, May 17th, 2 years ago. The Prescott job on Oak Street. The dash cam footage was grainy but clear enough. Andre's truck was parked in a driveway, facing the front door of an elegant 2-story house. The camera captured the side view of the porch where Andre and his crew were replacing decorative columns. "Watch the woman in the blue sweater," Andre said, pointing. "That's Diane Fuller, Barbara's friend from the garden club." On screen, Diane approached Andre's toolbox while his crew worked on the far side of the porch. She glanced around, then quickly slipped something from her pocket into the box. "There!" Andre froze the frame. She planted the jewelry pouch. Elias leaned closer. And 10 minutes later, Andre fast-forwarded. The footage showed Diane returning with Barbara. They opened the toolbox together, looking shocked as they found the jewelry pouch. Barbara immediately called the homeowner outside while pointing at Andre's crew. Andre's jaw tightened. "They set me up. All this time." His voice cracked. "I lost half my business. People canceled contracts. I couldn't pay my crew for weeks." Nadine touched his arm. "You kept this evidence without even knowing what was on it." "I never thought to check," Andre admitted. "I was too ashamed, too angry. I just packed everything away." Elias nodded grimly. "This proves Barbara's pattern. She creates false incidents, uses her authority to ruin people, then profits afterward." "We need to get to Mom's house," Marcia said, checking her watch. "She's expecting us at 10. They drove across town to Magnolia Lane, where Lillian Price sat waiting in her immaculate living room. Her hands trembled slightly as she offered them coffee from a silver tray. "I'm sorry I can't stand long," Lillian said, her voice thin but determined. "The doctor says I need to rest after what happened." "We won't stay long," Marcia promised, sitting beside her mother. Lillian pointed to a worn hat box on the coffee table. "It's in there. I kept it hidden because it scared me." Elias opened the box and found a blue folder labeled Magnolia Lane Acquisition Plan, Phase 2. Inside were draft purchase offers for 6 houses, including Lillian's corner lot and Ruth's brick colonial. Most shocking was the date. 8 months ago, before any major violations had been issued against Lillian or Ruth. "Barbara left this during an inspection," Lillian explained. "She was checking my back patio for unapproved modifications when her phone rang. She set her folders down, took the call, and walked into the garden. When she came back, she gathered everything quickly. I found this under the chair later." Elias examined the papers. Graham's company already had purchase prices calculated. They knew exactly how much to offer once you were desperate enough to sell. "The first violation notice came 2 weeks after the date on those papers," Lillian said. "Suddenly my roses were encroaching. My mailbox was non-conforming. My curtains were disharmonious with neighborhood aesthetics." Andre shook his head. "They picked their targets before sending a single fine. And they created violations to match their plan," Nadine added. Marcia squeezed her mother's hand. "Mom, this proves you didn't do anything wrong." "I knew I hadn't," Lillian whispered. "But when nobody believes you for so long, you start to doubt yourself." Elias carefully photographed each document, then placed them back in the folder. "With Andre's video and these papers, we have what we need." By early afternoon, Elias had compiled everything: Ruth's recording, Andre's dash cam footage, Lillian's acquisition plans, and dozens of fraudulent HOA notices with fabricated dates. He drove directly to the county prosecutor's office and submitted the evidence through proper legal channels, ensuring everything would be handled by the book. "I'm not acting as an agent," he told the intake clerk. "I'm filing this as a homeowner and as Ruth Grant's son." The clerk nodded, stamping the receipt. The prosecutor said to expect you. "They're expediting the review before tonight's hearing." As Elias left the building, his phone buzzed with a text from Nadine. "Barbara just announced the hearing is moving up to 5 p.m. instead of 7. She's trying to rush things." Elias looked at his watch. 3 hours until Barbara's public reckoning would begin. The neighborhood clubhouse buzzed with tension as residents filled every seat. Local news cameras set up in the back corner, their red lights blinking. Officer Rusk stood near the door in his off-duty clothes, arms crossed. Graham Ellison sat in the back row, checking his watch repeatedly. Barbara Ellison sat at the front table, perfectly composed in a cream-colored suit, flanked by 4 HOA board members. Her silver hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She tapped a small gavel against a wooden block, calling for order. "Thank you all for coming to this emergency hearing," Barbara said, her voice smooth and controlled. "I know it's unusual to move up the time, but given recent events, we felt it necessary to address these matters promptly." Elias stood near the middle of the room, alone but straight-backed. The whispers around him fell silent as Barbara continued. "For decades, Magnolia Lane has been known for its peace, safety, and standards. In recent months, that harmony has been disrupted." Barbara gestured toward Elias without looking at him. Mr. Grant arrived and immediately created an atmosphere of hostility, making unfounded accusations against this board and against me personally. Several people nodded. Others looked down at their hands. "Tonight, we will vote on 2 pressing matters," Barbara continued. "First, the approval of a property lien against 1422 Magnolia Lane for serious and ongoing violations." She glanced at a paper. "That's the Price residence. Second, permanent restrictions on unpermitted renovations at 1426 Magnolia Lane." Her eyes flicked to Elias. "The Grant property." Barbara smiled tightly. "Before we vote, does anyone wish to speak?" Elias rose from his seat. "I do." Barbara's smile hardened. "Mr. Grant, you're currently suspended from your federal position and under investigation for intimidation. You are not in good standing with this association. I'm going to have to ask you to remain silent while we conduct our business." "You called this hearing," Elias said calmly. "You invited the cameras. Let everyone hear the whole truth." "Sit down, Mr. Grant," Barbara snapped, her polite mask slipping. "Officer Rusk, please." A chair scraped across the floor. Nadine Porter stood beside Elias, her chin high. "I'd like to speak," Nadine said. Barbara's mouth tightened. "Mrs. Porter, this isn't—" Another chair moved. Andre Bell rose to his feet, tall and solid. "I have something important the neighborhood needs to hear," Andre said. From the side door, Marcia Price appeared, pushing her mother Lillian in a wheelchair. Lillian clutched a folder in her lap, her thin hands steady. "My mother has evidence of wrongdoing," Marcia announced. One by one, other residents stood. An elderly couple Elias had never met. A young Latino family from the cul-de-sac. A widow who lived next to Lillian. Barbara's face flushed. "This is outrageous. We have procedures." "Yes," Elias cut in. "We do have procedures. Legal ones. Not the kind you've been using to drive people from their homes." Barbara banged her gavel. "I will not tolerate these disruptions." But the room had shifted. People who had been afraid for years now stood together, finding strength in numbers. "I believe we should hear what they have to say," said a gray-haired man from the HOA board. "In the interest of transparency." Barbara stared at him, betrayal in her eyes. Elias stepped forward. "I'd like to play something for everyone. A recording my mother made before she died." He connected his phone to the clubhouse speakers. Ruth Grant's small recorder had captured everything with perfect clarity. Barbara's voice filled the room. "People connected to your son will never fit comfortably here on Magnolia Lane. Selling would be the dignified choice. The HOA can make life very expensive for people who don't understand our standards." Ruth's weaker voice responded, defending her son. When it ended, the silence was absolute. Barbara's face had gone from red to white. "Ruth was confused," Barbara said shakily. "She misunderstood." "We have more," Andre interrupted. He stepped forward with his laptop. "This is from my truck's dash cam 2 years ago. the day Barbara's friend accused my crew of stealing. The video played on the projector screen. Everyone saw Barbara's assistant slip the jewelry pouch into Andre's toolbox before the discovery that had ruined his reputation. In the back of the room, Graham Ellison rose quietly from his seat and edged toward the exit. "And this," Lillian said, her voice thin but clear as she held up the folder, "is the plan to buy our houses before any violations were issued. They targeted us first, then created reasons to fine us." Graham reached for the door just as it swung open. Two men in suits entered, followed by a woman carrying a briefcase with the state prosecutor's office seal. "Graham Ellison?" one of the men said. "We need to speak with you about some questionable real estate practices. And Mrs. Ellison," he continued, looking toward Barbara, "we'll need to review all HOA financial records immediately." Barbara's face crumpled as she realized the truth. The hearing she had arranged to destroy Elias had become her public reckoning instead. The neighbors she had intimidated for years were now witnesses to her downfall. "This meeting is adjourned," Barbara whispered, but no one was listening to her anymore. Inside the clubhouse, the atmosphere shifted dramatically as one investigator blocked Graham's path to the door, while another approached Barbara at the front table. The state prosecutor, a woman with close-cropped gray hair and unwavering eyes, addressed the room. "Mrs. Ellison, board members, I'm going to ask that everyone remain seated," she said, her voice steady but firm. "We have some serious matters to discuss regarding the financial and legal practices of this homeowners association." Barbara's perfectly composed facade began to crack. Her fingers trembled against the wooden gavel she still clutched. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising. "You can't just barge in here based on the complaints of disgruntled residents." The prosecutor placed her briefcase on the table. "We're here based on documented evidence of potential fraud, harassment, and abuse of authority. These aren't mere complaints." Graham tried to edge toward a side exit, but the second investigator stepped smoothly into his path. "Mr. Ellison, your real estate transactions with homeowners under financial duress from this HOA are central to our investigation." Barbara's eyes darted between Graham, the investigators, and the sea of neighbors watching her unraveling. The mask she'd worn for years, the polite community leader who only wanted what was best for Magnolia Lane, slipped completely off. "Do you know what he's done?" Barbara shouted, stabbing a finger toward Elias. "He's poisoned this entire neighborhood. He came here with his federal badge, throwing his weight around, turning everyone against me." Her voice grew shriller as she pointed at Nadine. "And she's always been manipulative, stirring up trouble, filling people's heads with lies about me." She swung toward Lillian in her wheelchair. "You can't possibly take her word for anything. The poor woman can barely remember what day it is." When her gaze landed on Andre, her eyes narrowed dangerously. "And him. Do you know his criminal history? Do you know how dangerous his people are?" The room fell silent at the naked prejudice in her words. Barbara seemed to realize she'd gone too far, but couldn't stop herself. "Everything I've done was to protect our property values, our way of life, our standards." Elias walked slowly to the front of the room until he stood directly in front of Barbara. His voice was quiet but carried to every corner. "You used paperwork like a weapon," he said. "You used rules like a club. You used fear like a fence to keep people trapped and silent. You targeted my mother when she was dying, and you've done the same to others who couldn't fight back." Barbara tried to interrupt, but Elias continued, his words measured and clear. "You thought the problem was me inheriting my mother's house, but the real problem was you inheriting power you were never fit to hold." The prosecutor turned to Officer Rusk, who stood uncomfortably by the wall. "Officer Rusk, we'll need to discuss the discrepancies between your written statement supporting Mrs. Ellison's complaint, and your body camera footage from the night you responded to her call about Agent Grant. Rusk paled. I was just responding to the call as reported. Your camera shows a different sequence of events than what you signed in your statement, the prosecutor replied. That will require explanation. She turned back to address the room. We are issuing subpoenas for all HOA records, financial statements, and communications dating back 5 years. Mr. Ellison's company files will also be seized for review. The lien process against Mrs. Price's property is hereby halted pending investigation. One of the board members, a thin man with glasses, raised his hand. Madam Prosecutor, in light of these allegations, I move to temporarily remove Barbara Ellison as HOA president, effective immediately. Another board member seconded the motion, and a quick vote passed it without a single opposing voice. Barbara stared in disbelief as her authority crumbled in real time. A local news camera captured everything from the back of the room. "You can't do this," she whispered, but there was no strength left in her voice. The prosecutor handed her a document. This outlines the investigation parameters and your legal obligations during this process. I suggest you contact an attorney. Barbara gathered her purse with shaking hands. Graham stood frozen near the exit, surrounded by investigators collecting his phone and laptop. As Barbara walked toward the door, neighbors she had intimidated for years watched in silence. Some looked away, uncomfortable with witnessing such a public fall. Others met her eyes directly for perhaps the first time. The cameras followed her as she stepped outside, her perfect posture finally broken, her shoulders slumped. Behind her, the community she'd ruled through fear had finally found its voice. Several weeks later, Elias stood on Ruth's repaired porch as Andre secured the final bracket for the swing Ruth had always wanted. The wooden swing, made of polished oak with careful detailing along the armrests, gleamed in the late afternoon sunlight. "That ought to hold through anything," Andre said, giving the chains a firm tug. "Your mother would have loved this." Elias ran his hand along the smooth wood. "She used to talk about sitting out here watching the street, greeting neighbors." Andre nodded, understanding the weight of what they'd accomplished. Funny how something so simple became so important. The FBI's internal affairs investigation had collapsed entirely once the full-body camera footage and multiple witness statements proved Barbara had manipulated the police incident. The complaint against Elias was dismissed with a formal apology from the department, his record cleared completely. Officer Rusk remained suspended, facing disciplinary action for falsifying his statement. Down on the lawn, Lillian sat comfortably in a cushioned chair, her daughter Marcia beside her. The color had returned to Lillian's cheeks, now that the stress of potential homelessness no longer hung over her. "I still can't believe it's over," Lillian said, watching as Nadine arranged a tray of lemonade glasses on the small table they'd set up. "I slept through the night for the first time in years last week. And the money they're refunding from those fake fines will cover your property taxes for the next 3 years, Marcia added, squeezing her mother's hand. Andre stepped down from the porch, wiping his hands on a cloth. My phone hasn't stopped ringing since everything came out. 3 new contracts just this week from people on this street. Well deserved, Elias said. Talent always finds its way back to the light. Nadine raised her glass. To justice that took its time but finally showed up. They all clinked glasses in the warm spring air. Across the street, Barbara's house stood empty, a large for sale sign planted firmly in the manicured lawn. Graham Ellison's development company was under formal investigation, with records showing a pattern of property acquisitions following HOA harassment. The new board seems decent, Marcia observed. That younger woman, Teresa, has already proposed monthly financial transparency reports. Elias nodded. Yes. And outside audits twice a year, plus a special advocate for homeowners over 65. The restructured HOA had implemented every protection Elias had suggested, with an additional committee focused on preventing predatory practices. The fraudulent fines against Ruth had been officially voided, with a formal apology added to neighborhood records. "I heard you're not going back to the bureau," Nadine said, sitting beside Elias on the porch steps. 30 years is enough," Elias replied. "I'm retiring with full honors next month." What he didn't say, though they all knew, was that he'd found something more important than his career. The Ruth Grant Home Justice Fund was already taking shape, with initial funding from Elias's retirement savings. Its mission: to provide legal assistance to elderly and vulnerable homeowners facing bureaucratic intimidation disguised as paperwork. "She'd be proud of you," Nadine said quietly, "not just for fighting back, but for helping others fight too." Andre looked up from where he was packing his tools. "My cousin in Richmond called yesterday. Said they're having similar problems with their HOA targeting certain families. I gave him your number. Hope that's okay." "That's exactly what the fund is for," Elias said. The evening light softened, casting long shadows across the lawn. Lillian dozed peacefully in her chair, while Marcia and Andre discussed the garden beds they planned to restore along her walkway. "It's not just about winning against Barbara," Nadine observed. "It's about what comes after. The neighborhood feels different now." Elias nodded. "People aren't afraid to wave, to stop and talk, to open their curtains," Nadine added meaningfully. As the gathering wound down, Andre helped pack the chairs, while Marcia guided a sleepy Lillian home. Nadine lingered, helping Elias clear away glasses and plates. "Try it out," she said, gesturing to the swing. "That's what it's there for." Elias settled onto the swing, feeling the gentle motion as it swayed. The chains made a soft creaking sound against the hooks Andre had installed. The sound felt right somehow. A house that was alive again. Nadine smiled. "I'll see you tomorrow, neighbor." After everyone had gone, Elias remained on the porch swing, watching darkness settle over Magnolia Lane. He took out his mother's small recorder, holding it gently in his palm. He didn't need to play it anymore. He knew her words by heart. He looked through the front door into the house that had caused so much struggle. Ruth's house. His house now. "You were right, Mama," he whispered as the swing rocked gently. "I earned every room." If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.